Good evening, everybody. This is Kiana. Welcome to my channel. And tonight we are going to be going into an update about the Jordan Neely case. If you remember, Jordan Neely was a Black man who unfortunately was unalived on a New York subway. So we are going to get into that tonight. But before we do, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. There has been an unsettling issue that has been happening within the last year or so. There's been anti-Black cyber hackers that have actually been getting into my accounts, my Twitter X account and other accounts, stopping my followership, sending me sexually suggestive material, just engaging in a harassment campaign because I'm a Black activist and I continue to talk about anti Black racism. So, your support is fundamental. It really would help. Uh, I think that as Black activists, we must stand together and stick together during these troubling times because what we're doing is we are raising our voice about a practice that is impacting us as a collective. And I want to be there to support you just as I would want you there to support me. So please like this video, share this video if you feel that it is relevant, and subscribe to this channel. So let's get into it. If you remember, Jordan Neely was a Black male who lived in New York. And oftentimes in the past, what he would do is he would put on shows, so street shows, as Michael Jackson. And he was quite talented as well. But what's very unsettling about this case is that Jordan Neely was a homeless Black man living in New York. And so on the night that he was unalived on a subway, Jordan Neely stepped onto the subway and he was expressing his voice about his situation. So he was given, he was quite, agitated. Well, he was, agitated on the subway. And he was complaining about not having enough food to eat or not having any food to eat, not having anything to drink, being homeless. And you can just imagine, and I want everybody to take a moment for a minute and just really sit back and reflect. And we're not going to look at Jordan Neely's skin color. We're not going to look at the fact that Jordan Neely was suffering from mental health issues. We are not going to look at that. We're going to focus on the humanity of a human being. And this was a man who stepped onto a subway and had a plight, who likely went days without eating, days without drinking. And one could only imagine that he went days without actually being able to have a proper shower. And I want you to just kind of reflect on that for a moment, what that could feel like for any human being to not have food, not to have anything to drink, not having the facilities to be able to shower. And if you're trying to approach people in a positive way and not in a way to where you're trying to manipulate them or to get anything over on them, but you are just going up to that person because you are hungry. And all people can see, and I could just imagine, is that there is a lot of judgment in these situations. And what people may see is a Black man first, a man that's disheveled, a man that hasn't showered. And there is judgments that so these judgments determine whether or not a person eats or a person is given 25 cents, 50 cents, a dollar. So think about being turned down not just one time, but being turned down multiple times, 40, 50 times during a period of hunger and starvation. And I can only imagine that that is what it was like for Jordan Neely, not only on the day that he lost his life to violence, but on multiple nights before that. And so, why this case is very important and why we must pay attention is that Jordan Neely could be any one of us. And what I mean by that is that at any time, you or I or any one of us could lose everything and could be in a position to where we are asking for handouts. And what's disconcerting about the entire situation is that Jordan Neely, I felt, was in a situation where frustration kind of bursted, right? So maybe he was holding this frustration in for quite some time and it just bursted onto the subway. But we must keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody who is listening, is that Jordan Neely didn't attack anyone. He didn't hit anyone. He didn't fight anyone, nor did he threaten to do that. The statements that he made on the subway was more so against himself. And if anyone wanted to help him, the perfect way to do that is to maybe have a conversation with him. Not only to have a conversation with him, but try to understand where he is coming from. And the way that you do that is by treating that person like a human being, sitting down and having a conversation with him. And it was an opportunity to do that because they were on a subway, there were seats there. And just as Daniel Penny could have walked up and put Jordan Neely in a chokehold, he could have also walked up and had a man to man conversation with Jordan Neely. Just as he could have subdued him with his hands, he could have subdued him with humanity. And we cannot forget that Daniel Penny decided to do the opposite. He decided to place his arms around Jordan Neely's neck, take him to the ground, and choke him. And every time that Jordan Neely decided that he wanted to take a breath, or his struggle for a breath, every struggle for a breath, every struggle for a breath, what did Daniel Penny do? He squeezed harder, and he squeezed harder, and he squeezed harder. And he kept his arms around Jordan Neely for 15 minutes. Now think about that. That is too long to subdue a person. And if you wanted to stop this person from harming themselves and harming others, you could have done that differently. You could have restrained that person without putting your arm around his neck so he could not breathe. You could have restrained his arms and his legs, but you didn't do that. What you did was you put your arm around a man's neck because one thing that you knew would happen is that you knew that there would be the dominant society on your side. And you knew that if you took that black man's life, that he would have not that many people advocating in his corner. And that's what you thought would happen. But the opposite did happen is that multiple people came out against this unalivement and spoke out about it. Multiple people said, no, this was wrong. This was an unalivement in public space. So I think that we should really reflect on this case that's coming up. Again, Daniel Penny is jury selection is happening, and we cannot forget. Ladies and gentlemen, oftentimes what is happening is that there is a narrative being pushed about Black Americans that is becoming dominant in the dominant society. And one is that Black Americans are violent when we are not. Two is the the trope that all Black Americans are suffering from a mental illness. And so we know this to be false. And we know that this use of psychiatry to silence dissent, it goes back to the slavery era. It goes back to colonialism, and these are colonial practices to subdue Black Americans, enslaved Africans. So they used it on enslaved Africans to actually bring them back to the plantation. They also use it on people from the African diaspora. And the reason why it's important that we talk about this is because it's so easy to say, yeah, that person has a mental illness when really they don't have one. Perfect example. Let's go into it. Candace Owens. Now, I will reiterate 95% of what Candace Owens talks about, I disagree with. But have you seen what was happening lately where every article that popped up was using terminology and phraseology such as Candace is out of her mind, Candace is unhinged, Candace is crazy, all this phraseology. And so basically, what happens, ladies and gentlemen, and if you're Black, you really need to be very cognizant of this. What happens is the moment that you speak out against something in the dominant societies, especially when it has to do with racism, what the dominant society does is they come together, collect together, and they get on code. And so, what do you mean? You may say, Kiana, what do you mean by code? They get on a silent code. Now, this could be human rights organizations, this could be solicitors, attorneys, courts. This is a systematic and institutional practice that is still happening. And when you complain about racism, you are going to have all the people in the dominant society get on code, and they are going to figure out a way to silence you. And one of the ways in which Black Americans are being silenced in Western society, and I'm talking about in Western nations such as the United States, the Republic of Ireland, is through political use of psychiatry. And what do I mean by that? So, oftentimes, what will happen is that authority figures in the community who are practicing and practicing racism, what they will do is come together and decide to silence you. And one way in which they try and do that is by suggesting that you should visit a mental health practitioner, suggesting that your experiences of microaggressions, micro assaults, micro insults, that all of the above is a figment of your imagination, that you are not being discriminated in any way, you're not being treated differently in any way. This is all within your mind. And ladies and gentlemen, this is called race lighting. Race lighting is where a person of color, especially a Black person, they complain about an act of racism or racial prejudice only to have those in power in the dominant society not take that seriously and turn it back on you to say you're the problem. See, when we talk about racism, it's the dominant society who is putting that practice into circulation that has the problem. But when you talk about mental health issues or mental illness, that's a way that the dominant society can reverse it back and say, no, we don't have the problem. It's you that has the problem. You're the person that's misunderstanding everything. You're the person that's not seeing everything clearly. You're the person that it isn't not right in the mind. And we all agree that it's you. And what's so unfortunate about this, ladies and gentlemen, is that you have people from the African diaspora that is falling in line with this dangerous rhetoric. And this goes beyond hyperbole. This is a human rights violation. Not only is it a human rights violation, but it is also a state crime. Because what happens is that when this is put into practice, it allows the state to harm those who are speaking out against racism. And so I'll give you just an example. Let's say, for instance, you have an activist that is speaking out against racism. And this activist is just pretty active. They are not speaking in it out in a way in which it is crossing the line, crossing the extremism line. It's not doing that, right? It's well within the parameters and well within the confines of the law. Howsoever, because it's within the confines of the law, the dominant society does not like that because they want it to be, outside the margins so that they can say that you are the extremist, that you are the person who is out of control. And if your ideology and your speech is within the margins, then they can't say that. So they have to come up with something else. And so the second thing that they come up with is, let's say that this person has a mental illness, because if we say that the person is mentally unstable, then everything that they talk about is can be discredited. And everything that they talk about, we can say that this is really a delusion, really a figment of that person's imagination. And so, what often happens after that is when that is successful, is that is when it gets deeper. That's when everybody comes on. This is kind of like an example of the Brenda effect, where everybody comes in and starts to oppress this person because of their speech. Not because of a crime, but because of their speech. So everybody's coming in and they're attacking this one person. And so oftentimes these attacks are happening every single day. It's a micro aggression, a micro insult, a micro assault. And let's say that the person is strong enough to handle it, right? Strong enough to handle it. And let's say that the state does not like that. Well, now the state feels like they don't want to hear this person talking. They don't want to listen to this person's speech because their speech is an affront to the status quo. And then we often have incidents where we have Black Americans being unalived at home and abroad. And I wasn't able to, come up with cases of Black Americans being unalived abroad, but we can't rule it out. It's probably there's probably a dark figure of crime there, but a justification, ladies and gentlemen, for unaliving Black bodies is that Black bodies are not mentally stable. And so there is this notion that a Black person is going to be aggressive, or that aggression is then translated into imminent danger for the recipient, the person who's on the receiving end. And this further feeds into the tropes that are being said about Black Americans, despite there not being any evidence in the United States or abroad of Black Americans engaging in any activity that would be classified as extremism or anything that's a national security issue. So it's quite unfortunate, I think. And I think that that's why this case with Jordan Neely is so important. And it's imperative that we really pay attention to this trial, because this was a Black man. And yes, he was homeless. And yes, he was frustrated one night on the subway. But what also is important about that night is that you had a man who had military training that took his life. And it raises the question as to whether this was an intentional act because of the length of time that Penny had his arm around Neely's neck. So, ladies and gentlemen, if we are going to talk about being anti racist, and if we are coming together as a collective and we're walking and we're saying, united against racism, we can't be afraid to confront these issues. We can't be afraid to confront racism that is happening within the United States. We cannot be afraid to confront issues of racism within abroad and in these countries that are traveling and protesting and coming together and saying united against racism. If we are going to be united against racism, we have to be united against racism. You can't say united against racism And then when a person of color, specifically people of African descent, speak out against racism, then they become profiled and attacked. If we're united against racism, those voices who have been victimized by racism should be able to speak. And I'm speaking to you organizations who are saying united against racism, and you that are holding rallies, you should be able to allow those voices to be heard, and you should understand those experiences. And I'm not saying that you haven't done that, but what I'm seeing today out on the street is I'm not seeing enough voices being represented, especially those that are experiencing racism and prejudice, which is an ongoing issue in so many countries. So I really want to remind everyone to really keep an eye on the Daniel Penny and Jordan Neely case that's coming up in the courts in the United States. I really want to also remind people to really be authentic allies. If you're going to be an ally against racism, you have got to stand in support and in alliance with people that are experiencing racism, and you have to hear their stories. That's the only way unity is going to happen. That's the only way that diversity can breathe and exist. It's the only way. So I'm Kiana Canada, and again, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. That's at Real Kiana Canada. You can follow me on Facebook. My Facebook account is linked to this YouTube account, so don't forget to check that out and see what I post. And subscribe to this channel. Also, like, share this video, and I hope to talk to you soon. Bye bye.